Sunday of Lent, and for Lent, for these next few weeks, we are going to be together. I'm encouraging you to read through the book of John very slowly. I'm going to give you just a couple chapters each week. I'm going to ask you to read those chapters every day, if you would. And so you're going to read the same thing again and again, which is a good thing. You're going to learn something new every time. And so today we're starting where we should start, John chapter 1. Right? You start a book at the very beginning. I'm not going to read the whole chapter for you because you're going to be reading it 5 times this week, hopefully. But John chapter 1 is John's Christmas story. And when you read it, you're going to be surprised. Because you're not going to read about any shepherds. You're not going to read about any angels in the sky. You're not going to read about Bethlehem. You're not going to read about a manger and because there's no room for them in the inn. You're not going to read any of those details. If you want to read that Christmas story, go to one of the other Gospels, Matthew, Mark, or Luke. You're not going to get it in John. John does give us that same story, but he gives it to us from a very different perspective. He gives it to us from a spiritual perspective, from a heavenly perspective, from God's perspective. And so really we read the heart of John's Christmas story last Sunday, if you were here. Right? In verse 14 of chapter 1, he writes, "The Word became flesh." Remember, the Word is Jesus. We talked about that last Sunday. "The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth." There's the Christmas story for John. It's the same story, right? God came to earth as a human being, and nobody really even noticed that day, did they? Right? This moment, think about that. This moment when Jesus was born was the most amazing moment in all of history, in all of eternity. And I can only imagine in heaven, all of heaven kind of held its breath at this moment when Jesus was born. And yet here on earth, no one noticed. The sun rose the next morning and people went out and bought vegetables at the market and they washed their breakfast dishes after breakfast and they did their laundry and they went to work and they went to school and it was just a regular old day. Yeah, 3 Kings noticed a little bit later, but most of the world, they just went on. Right? And yet this is the arrival of God. God come to earth. We read verse 18 last week. No one has ever seen God, but the one and only Son, who is himself God and is in the closest relationship with the Father, has made him known. This is God here on earth. God come to you and me. Yeah, you and I'm guessing, I'll speak for myself. I've heard this truth so many times that I'm not even amazed by it anymore. Okay, God came to earth as a baby. That should be absolutely amazing every time you hear it. Let me tell you why this should be amazing to you. If you've read the Old Testament, think about every time that God himself came near to a human being, just came close. The stories are amazing, right? So one of the first times you have is when Moses is out watching his sheep out in the desert, right? And all of a sudden, he sees this bush that's burning. And God is in, but it's not burning up. It's on fire, but it's not burning up. And God is in the bush there, his presence. And as Moses comes closer, all of a sudden he hears a voice that says, "Stop. Don't come any closer. In fact, take your shoes off, because all of this ground around the bush is holy ground. And if you step here, you're doomed. You're in trouble. Stay away. It's dangerous, right?" And then Moses sees God again on top of Mount Sinai after he's led the whole nation of Israel out of Egypt. And they're around the mountain, and God's presence is on the mountain. And if you read that chapter, it says that the mountain was shaking like an earthquake, and it was surrounded by clouds and thunder and lightning. Enough that the people said to Moses, hey, you know what? How about you go up the mountain? We're going to stay right here. We're not going to go close. It was terrifying to have God present. Moses goes up the mountain, and he begs to see the presence of God. And God says, okay, I'll show you, but you need to hide behind this rock, and you can only get a glimpse of my back. And so he does. He just gets a quick glimpse, and it says that his face glowed for weeks afterwards. It was so bright that he had to wear a veil over his face. And then years and years later, King David. Remember in David's time, they're moving the Ark of the Covenant, which is the symbol of God's presence with his people. And they're doing it wrong. They're supposed to carry it. They put it in a cart, and that's a big mistake for God's holiness. But remember the oxen stumble, the cart starts to tip, and so Uzzah, the guy driving, reaches out to grab the ark, and he's instantly dead. And it says that the people of Israel were terrified of the ark. They're terrified of God's presence. They hid it in somebody else's garage for a while because they didn't want it nearby. You get the picture? When God comes close, it's pretty terrifying. It's pretty scary. And now John says, the Word has come as a human being. God has arrived in this person of Jesus. That's not a comfortable message. How terrifying is this going to be? How dangerous is this going to be? And so in John chapter 1, we get to meet Jesus, God in the human form. Who is he? What is he going to look like? How terrifying is this going to be? And you're going to read, John the Baptist is the first one to point him out. Right? John the Baptist points Jesus out as he walks to him near the river Jordan. And you know what the amazing thing is? That this guy, God made human, that John points out, is really ordinary. He looks like a normal guy. It's safe around him. That's amazing. This God who burns bushes, who rattles mountains, whose presence is so powerful that he can't even come close, he's just walking around. Looking like you, looking like me, talking to people. He's fully God. Has all the power and glory of God. And yet here he is, fully human. He shivered when it was cold outside. And as a kid, when he snuck into his dad's carpenter shop and hit his thumb with a hammer, he cried. And when he went to school, he had to learn, and it was hard. He was just like you and just like me. But he was God. In fact, he experienced every temptation that you have felt. Only he was able to say no. Just like you, just like me, except without sin. That's who you're going to meet in John chapter 1. And as you read, as you meet him, ask yourself this question too. Consider this. Why would God do this? Why would God come as a human being? Why sneak into our world and put on and be just like you and me? He didn't have to do this. And what torture this must have been for Jesus. And consider that for a moment. He is God. He knows all. He has all glory, all power, all authority. And for a time he says, I'm going to become human. With all of its limitations, with all of the struggles that humans go through, with all of the pain that they experience. I'm even going to go so far as I'm going to experience the same death that they experienced. What torture! Well, God became human in Jesus because it was the only way that you and I could be rescued. It's the only way that you and I could be set free from the guilt of our sin. We needed, as Malachi said, the light of his righteousness to shine into our darkness. That's the only way to conquer the darkness within us. He had to be one of us. He had to be one of us if his sacrifice was going to be effective for us. And he came to be sacrificed, right? You're going to read in John chapter 1, when John the Baptist first sees Jesus, he says, "Look, the Lamb of God." In fact, he calls him that twice. The first title that Jesus is ever given is Lamb of God. And the Lamb of God has come to be sacrificed. And that lamb, if it was going to be sacrificed for you and for me, then it needed to be one of us. If it's going to take our place. There's a lot of places where that one of us requirement comes into play. Think about it. If you've never given birth, which I think you have not, then you cannot say to your wife, "Well, I understand the pain." Don't even try and go there. Don't even compare your kidney stone to the pain of childbirth. It's not worth it. Because you're not one of us. You can't say, "I understand." You're not one of us. If you've never experienced receiving a cancer diagnosis, you can't say to this someone who has, "I understand what you're going through," because you're not one of us. You don't know it. I have a friend whose teenage child suddenly died years ago. Totally unexpected. I can't say to that friend, "I understand," because I'm not one who has experienced that. Isn't that the power of support groups in the world, right? It's a gathering of people who are all one of us. We're all together. And that's why we can understand and encourage each other. Has to be one of us. There's an interesting true story about King Abdullah II, who is still the king of Jordan. He became king in 1999, and he's still reigning in Jordan. And early on in his kingship, when he was just a young man, he wanted to know what it was like out there, outside the palace, for his people. And so he would pretty regularly sneak out. He'd put on a costume, and he'd go out and spend the day with his people. He once put on a fake beard, and he went and just stood in the grocery line and in the bank line without talking to people. Nobody knew he was the king. Another time he dressed up like an old man, and he went to the hospital to talk to people about health care and what they were experiencing in the hospital. They say that once he even grabbed a microphone and he became a news anchor and broadcast a news story, and nobody knew it was the king doing it. One day he drove a taxi all day long, talked to everybody who rode in his taxi. They had no clue they were riding with the king. And you know what? Because he does that, he understands better what it means to be one of them. I'm one of you. I'm not separate. I'm one of you. And the king can better lead because he's experienced being one of them. I love that story, but it doesn't quite parallel perfectly with what God did. Because God didn't just put on a disguise. He didn't just dress up like a human being. God became you and me. He became what we are. Because the only way he could rescue us is to be one of us. So the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. God became human, one of us, so that we could be set free. So that we could become something new. So that the light could rise within us. Right? Athanasius, back in the year 300, he said this. He said, He, Jesus, became what we are, so that he might make us what he is. I love that line. Who is it? What is Jesus? Jesus is a child of God. He's the Son of God. And you and I can now become children of God, sons and daughters of the King, because he became one of us. So I hope you're going to read John chapter 1 multiple times this week. And you're going to be introduced to Jesus. You're going to see who God was willing to become for you. Because it's important to know who he is, so that as we read on through this book, we can see what God, living as one of us, was willing to do for you, for your salvation, to see how far his love would go for you. And we'll be able to see what God, living as one of us, looks like, so that we will know how then to live, how to become more like him as sons and daughters of the King. And so John chapter 1, you're going to be introduced to God himself as one of us. Experience and be in awe of the miracle that God made human, of God, one of us. Would you pray with me?